What's up, my wizards? It's Dev, Mtg. We like it. Magic back on the couch. I had to get back to my roots every now and again for a spoiler video. It is Friday, and we got like 25 cards to talk about today. But a lot of them really are meant for the limited environment. We got a really good look at what draft and sealed are going to look like today. And there's kind of a +1/+1 counter and proliferate theme running through a lot of today's cards. We'll get to all that, but there's also like 3 or 4 rares I want to go over that I think might be actually kind of impactful in some cases. So let's go ahead and jump into everything. All right, well, let's look at all the sort of chaffy stuff really quick before we get into all the, counters and proliferate stuff from today. First, there was Goblin Assailant. We also saw Blind Blast and Loxodon Sergeant. Goblin Assailant, just a 2-mana 2/2 Goblin, not really much there. Blind Blast is a little bit more interesting, and I do like cantrips, but this one's a little bit too expensive. And if there are a lot of X1s running around in Limited, then maybe, but I'm not really seeing that too much with all the +1/+1 counters that are going to be available to put on creatures in this environment. So I'm not too sure about Blind Blast. But you might be able to, say, blow somebody out in response to them trying to put a counter on something. Blind Blast it, kill it, draw a card, that's good. Or if you're just in a really aggressive deck, it might be worth 3 to draw a card and keep a guy from blocking. As far as Sergeant goes, this is just a hill giant. 4-mana 3/3s aren't the best thing in the world, but it's got Vigilance, nice to add a keyword ability, and it gives all your dudes Vigilance the turn it comes down, which is, I guess, fine, in the early to mid game in sealed or in draft, whatever. If you've got a few guys on the battlefield and you're trying to get through a sort of consequence-free attack, this can be all right, and it might be worth filling out your curve with, but there's a lot more exciting stuff to get to today. Now, a couple of cards that are a step up from those, but aren't really easily categorized with the rest of today's themes. We saw Cyclops Electroman and Band together. A banding reference. Can you bring banding back? They'll never do it. Anyway, Band together is 3 mana, 2 and a green for an instant. Up to 2 target creatures you control each deal damage equal to their power to another target creature. And Cyclops Electromancer is 5 mana, 4 and a red for a 4/2 Cyclops Wizard, good creature type. And when it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to target creature an opponent controls, where X is the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. Now, both of these are really decent pieces of removal in Limited. Now, Band together, when I first read it, I thought you could just blow out 2 creatures with this, but it turns out you can actually only target 1 creature on the other side of the table. You're just kind of ganging up on it. So this is almost always going to kill even big-ish creatures if you have a well-developed board. And I like that about it. I really like these, this fight mechanic where the creatures don't hit back that they've been doing lately. This card looks pretty good to me, especially at instant speed. But Electromancer looks fine too. Not sure this sees any standard play, obviously, but in Limited this is a fine uncommon, and if your deck is built correctly, this can deal, 3-4 damage in the late game when it comes down and give you a serviceable body. But let's get into the +1/+1 counter synergies from today. There were quite a few of them. We saw Courage in Crisis, Goblin Assault Team, and Iron Bully, just to kind of start things off here. Bully just allows you to put a +1/+1 counter on something when it enters the battlefield, and it has Menace as a 3-mana 1/1. That's almost never where you want to be, but this is sometimes just going to be a 3-mana 2/2 with Menace, and obviously, if you proliferate a couple of times, this can be a relatively big Menace creature for what turns out to be a low cost, but the upfront investment is always pretty high, and if you put the +1/+1 counter on another creature, it's just a 3-mana 1/1 Menace, which is almost never good. But if you are trying to really cheat proliferate, then this is going to be a card you want to look at. Same thing with the Assault Team. This is a 4-mana 4/1 Goblin Warrior with haste, and when it dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. So it's kind of just a really expensive sparring construct, but it can come down, for 4 mana with haste and go ahead and attack for 4. It's the best part about the card. Almost definitely is its haste power, but at least when it does die, which it's almost certainly going to get blocked and die most of the time, then at least it leaves behind some value, and that's okay. Now, Courage in Crisis is the first card we'll see today with Proliferate printed on it, but it definitely won't be the last. They spoiled plenty today, but this is just a 3-mana sorcery. You put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, then Proliferate. So effectively, even if you just have one guy out, you get 2 +1/+1 counters. So that's not too bad at all. And obviously, it goes without saying with all these Proliferate cards, if you have Planeswalkers, they get much, much better immediately. So if you've got a deck with like 2-3 Planeswalkers in sealed or draft or whatever, this card gets incredible if you're also able to back it up with creatures and stuff. So I like this card a good bit. Wish that it was instant speed, but instant speed proliferate is really, really dangerous. As it is, I like this, especially if you do have 1 or 2 other creatures with +1/+1 counters. This pays off really well. And as you'll see, it's not too hard to get counters on creatures in this limited environment. We've got Stealth Mission and Rescuer Sphinx and Makeshift Battalion. Let's look at all of these real quick. Battalion is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 3/2 human soldier. And whenever it and at least 2 other creatures attack, it's one of these, put a +1/+1 counter on Battalion. So next turn, when it attacks, it can be effectively a 3 mana 4/3, and then in subsequent turns, 5/4, 6/5 if it continues to survive and attack with other stuff. As far as Stealth Mission goes, I like this a good bit. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. That creature can't be blocked this turn. Well, there are good things and bad things. I feel like this is kind of too much of a one-off card in Limited to really be good, but I always like stuff that says this guy can't be blocked. I'm a sucker for that, and I probably over evaluate them, or at least I have too favorable of an opinion of stuff that says this guy can't be blocked, especially when it makes the creature that much bigger. Very often sealed games will come down to like one big bomb creature finishing the game off, and sometimes you're just running your bombs into each other. You both have 4 power flyers or whatever, and this will help you at least finish the game off. And if it doesn't finish the game, it at least leaves the creature bigger when you end your turn. So there are some things I like about this, but it's really got to be worth the slot to you. Now, Rescuer Sphinx is pretty much always going to be worth the slot, I would imagine. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue for a 3/2 Sphinx with flying. As Rescuer Sphinx enters the battlefield, you may return a non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. If you do, Rescuer Sphinx enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, this I kind of like a lot. I don't like the 2 or even just 3 toughness if it does get the +1/+1 counter. That's not actually that high for a 4 mana flyer, even in a format like Sealed. That's when you really want to start to get into the big stuff. It's 4, 5, 6 mana. And honestly, even if this gets a counter on it, it's not as big as I'd like it to be, but it's still a 4 power flyer in that situation that can end up resetting a Planeswalker, or maybe getting back a creature with a good enter the battlefield trigger that puts counters on stuff, whatever. So there's plenty of play for this in Sealed and in Draft, and I think that if you draft up just the right number of cards to go around it, there's so much extra play you can get out of it, and on top of that, you'll get a 4 power flyer, or at the very least a 3 power flyer. So a lot of like about the card. I think that it probably goes all the way in Sealed and makes the cut. But now let's look at even more Proliferate stuff. We saw Grateful Apparition, Bloom Hulk, and Pollen Bright Druid today. I like pretty much all of these in Sealed, again, specifically. Grateful Apparition is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 1/1 spirit with flying. And when it deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, Proliferate. Now, obviously this could be very good, and it's relatively easy to get through in the early-ish game in Seal, but there's some tension there because how many counters are you really going to have on things in the early game? But of course, if you have a Planeswalker out or something, then this gets really, really good if you can get it through for damage. So watch out for Grateful Apparition. I do like evasive creatures, especially at a low cost in Sealed, but this is really, really, vulnerable. It's quite fragile. But again, that said, you got a Planeswalker, it's good, and if you can get +1/+1 counters on it, it's really good. Even if you just get 1 +1/+1 counter, it'll start feeding itself and getting bigger when it goes through for combat damage. So there are some cool things about Spirit, and it's got the right creature type too. But Bloom Hulk, I like a lot too. This is just 4 mana for a 4/4 when it ETBs Proliferate. Now, 4 mana for a 4/4 at common is actually really, really good. And again, this is a common way to proliferate pretty easily. This is just enter the battlefield, proliferate, not having to jump through too many hoops at all. And you get a pretty well-statted creature for the cost, too. So this is a premium common, as far as I'm concerned. One of the easiest ways in the set to proliferate. Some things, it's whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. Whenever it gets through for combat damage, proliferate. All you have to do is cast this spell, and not only will your planeswalkers get more loyalty counters, all your creatures with counters will get bigger, but you have a 4 mana 4/4. Like, there's just nothing wrong with the card, even if you're not actually proliferating anything. When it enters the battlefield, still worth the body for the cost most of the time. And at common, this is insane. Sometimes you'll get 2 copies of this in a sealed pool, or more on occasion if you're really lucky. That's when things can go off the rails. You really want to play a Proliferate deck. But Pollen Bright Druid ain't half bad either, and it's common as well. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 1/1 elf druid. And when it enters the battlefield, choose 1. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or proliferate. So this is awesome. It gives you a lot of stretch either way, and even though 2 mana for a 1/1 is not exactly where you want to be, you can at least turn it into a bear if you have no other creatures, 2 mana 2/2. Or in the very late game, this becomes great. You got a planeswalker or 2 on the battlefield, or maybe you've developed a board with 2 or 3 +1/+1 countered guys, Then suddenly proliferate on this can create like 4 power for 2 mana, which is obviously a really good deal. Widens your team, or at least makes your team taller, and just putting a +1/+1 counter on a creature can be good some of the time too. And this has some standard implications. We've got Benthic Biomancer, Incubation Druid, but I don't think that it's quite good enough for all that jazz. But in sealed, this is, a bread and butter card. And the last card that I want to show you before I show my face to you here is Defiance Strike. Defiance Strike is back, and this is actually a leg up from most of the limited cards we've covered today. This is a decent limited combat trick, a reprint from Theros block, but it was actually an important card in Theros Standard because we had the heroic mechanic. It turns out, a little bit later on the line today, we're going to have a creature that functionally has heroic and goes really well with this card. So keep it in the back of your mind. It might actually be standard playable. But the first card I want to start with, actually talking to you face-to-face, eye-to-eye here, is Heartfire. This card is really interesting to me. It's just 2 mana, 1 and a red for an instant. That's nice. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature or a planeswalker. Heartfire deals 4 damage to any target. This is awesome. This is pretty good, right? Like, it's fine. In a couple of decks, both Mardu aristocrats and just red-black aristocrats, we're looking for ways to sacrifice creatures, right? So, this looks like a bad version of Fling, on its face, but this actually, it turns out, looks really good to me, You sacrifice, what is it, Dreadhorde Butcher, that thing that when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power or something. If that thing is relatively big, and you Heartfire it, well, you'll do 4 damage to a target from Heartfire, and then whatever that thing's power is when it dies, or just the fact that if a creature is about to die in combat or something like that, you can just Heartfire it real quick and deal 4 damage either to the creature that killed it in combat or just straight to your opponent's dumb, ugly face. So 4 damage for 2 mana is insane. And even at the cost of having to sacrifice something, I still don't think that it's that big of a deal, especially considering there are plenty of ways you could spend that sacrifice into, a good thing for you. It could be beneficial in multiple ways in Aristocrats decks in this format. So I like a lot about this card. I think it speeds up the clock, especially for black-red. A lot. If you wanted to, in that deck, you've already got all the burn in standard, except for maybe Wizard's Lightning. But now that you add this, you've got Skewer and Shock and Lightning Strike, this if you wanted, plus plenty of creatures that sacrifice 4 value, like Footlight Fiend makes us do 5 damage, Dreadhorde Butcher, again, makes us do even more damage. So there's a lot I like about this, like even relatively useless stuff, like late in the game, your Viashino Pyromancer did 2 damage when it entered the battlefield, but it's not really doing a heck of a lot now. Sacrifice it for 4 damage, you just got 6 damage out of those 2 cards, which is pretty good output. So, again, just the fact that this speeds up the clock so much for the decks that might want it, I think this is really impactful. Now, in a similar vein here, in red, when it comes to sacrificing stuff, we also saw Devouring Hellion today. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 2/2 Hellion. And when it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice any number of creatures and or planeswalkers. If you do, Devouring Hellion enters the battlefield with twice that many +1/+1 counters on it. Alright, now this also could have standard implications in the black-red or even Mardu Aristocrats decks. There are probably better ways to sacrifice creatures in both of those decks, but I do like a lot about this. You've got that new Blood Artist that just came out the other day, plus you've got, again, Dreadhorde Butcher and Footlight Fiend and stuff, so you could sacrifice a bunch of creatures and get all the value. You got a Judith out or something like that, you'll get even more, damage off of that interaction at least, and you'll end up with a 6/6 or an 8/8 really easily. You sacrifice 3 guys, suddenly you got an 8/8. Ain't half bad. Although sacrificing dudes when something enters the battlefield is almost never good. You don't want to 2 or 3 for 1 yourself. Most of the time, that's a bad practice. But if again, you've got just the right deck and just the right board state, you can do plenty of nasty things with this. Just has to convince me that it's actually there. I'm not sure it's quite there, but it is a really exciting card to at least maybe test out in these red-black or Mardu decks. And man, speaking of red-black, that deck got some action today. Here's Mayhem Devil. This is 3 mana, 1 a black and a red for a 3/3 Devil. And whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. So just, how much business is this Rakdos Aristocrats deck getting at this point, you know? This goes really well with Judith, although I hate that it's on curve with Judith. That kind of sucks. But, you know, the fact that you can just add even more damage onto, like, Fireblade Artist, you know, or maybe you sacrifice Fanatical Firebrand, something you're dealing 2 to something. You know, you sacrifice Footlight Fiend, you're dealing 2 to something. Sacrifice a Dreadhorde Butcher, you get +1 damage. So sometimes, like, this is basically a Blood Artist. Again, it's one of these. In black or red, you know, it doesn't quite work the way that Blood Artisty creatures usually work. This isn't a dies trigger. Sacrifice trigger is a lot harder to get, and it's not quite as good in combat and stuff. So I'm not totally sure this makes the cut either, but obviously that text box is exactly where you want to be, so we'll have to see. Now there's actually a Proliferate card I haven't talked about today, and that's Merfolk Skydiver. I like this thing. This is 2 mana, a green and a blue for a 1/1 Merfolk mutant with flying. And when it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Now, you can also pay 3, a green and a blue to proliferate. Now, this is very likely just a really playable limited card. Looks great in that format. Proliferate on a stick, a mana sink, flood protection that lets you proliferate looks really, really, really good in that environment. Again, especially if you're able to get a couple of planeswalkers, that looks phenomenal. The longer the game goes, the better this card gets, at least with its activated ability being considered. But even in the early game, this is kind of fine. You know, sometimes you get just a 2/2 flyer for 2 mana, which is good. Like, that's actually pretty fat right there, you know? Both PHAT and FAT. But, you know, if you're just putting the counter on another creature, you still get a, you know, 2 mana, 1/1 flyer and a slightly bigger creature, and then you proliferate and make it even bigger, you know? Or, again, if you just put the counter on this, once you start proliferating, suddenly you have a 3/3 flyer and a 4/4 flyer. So, I like a lot about this card, and I don't know that it quite has the legs for standard. It seems a little bit pushed. Just a little bit, but again, I'm not sure that it's there. I'd really like to try it out in like a blue-green tempo deck, but you know, I think that the best way to play tempo is just to keep it mono-blue and keep it as consistent as possible. But this is at least a really, really cool card, and it does get the, you know, it gets the juices flowing, makes you want to do some stuff with it, but I'm not sure that it quite crosses the finish line. That said, kind of excited about basically a 2 mana 2/2 flyer that lets you just proliferate whenever you want. But let's take a look at Neoform, everybody. This is a green and a blue for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost. Put that card onto the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it, and shuffle your library. Do you guys remember when I said that Eldritch Evolution was the best card in, like, Eldritch Moon? That's what it was. It took me a second. I don't know why it took me that long. Name of the set's right there in the card. But you guys remember that? Turns out it didn't see much standard play. But it still does see occasional play in like Modern, so a little bit of indication there. Probably still not the best card in the set. But obviously, what I'm trying to say here is that cards like this excite me. And this is kind of an Eldritch Evolution in some ways, like a 2 mana Eldritch Evolution that only lets you go and get something that's 1 bigger as opposed to 2 bigger. You can also just look at this as a Vannifar activation that you don't have to actually have to cast Vannifar for. So I like that, and there's plenty of tricky stuff you can do with it. Sacrifice a 1 mana guy, go get a Fibblethip and draw 2 cards. I've seen that a couple of times today, but obviously, you know, being able to sacrifice a 3-drop and get a 4-drop can be really, really nice too. Or on up the ladder, a 4-drop into a 5-drop is often very nice too. So I do really like this card, and it goes well with any +1/+1 counter synergies or proliferate, whatever, you know. If you get Lionel Elves, let's just say, on turn 1, then turn 2, you can cast this card, target your Lionel Elves, go get an Incubation Druid, and put the +1/+1 counter on it. So that's not bad. That's not bad either. There's plenty of tricky things you can do with this. Can't wait to get in the lab with it. I love cards like this, and this might actually have an impact. And if nothing else, Commander played for the rest of time, very likely. But let's move on to 10th District Legionnaire right here. This is Boros colors, a red and a white, for a 2/2 human soldier with haste. And whenever you cast a spell that targets 10th District Legionnaire, you put a +1/+1 counter on 10th District Legionnaire. It's hard to say over and over. And then you scry 1. So this looks insanely pushed to me. Like, it looks like it just started as like a 2 mana 2/2 whenever you cast a spell that targets heroic. This is the heroic thing I was talking about. Whenever you cast a spell that target it, puts +1/+1 counter on it. And then they just pushed it. They were like, well, add scry to that ability. Oh, and add haste to the guy. You know, it feels like they pushed this guy into standard playability. Just by adding stuff to it, you know. Just a 2-mana 2/2 haste is at least worth mentioning in and of itself. But the ability to put +1/+1 counters on, and scry, like the extra scry off of this in aggro decks is really, really good. You can't discount that. But the fact that you can easily make this a 3/3 and then a 4/4 is really, this card is quite good looking to me. If I say so myself, you know, Boros aggro decks might actually want this, especially if they're playing the sort of requisite number of combat tricks. You know, earlier we looked at Defiance Strike, and Defiance Strike works really, really well with this card, because the way things will shake out is you cast your Defiance Strike on it, and look, you've targeted it with a spell. So before Defiance Strike resolves, you put the +1/+1 counter on it, and then you scry. So you scry before you draw the card from Defiance Strike. So that's just really, really well done there, guys. But we also have, you know, Samet Strike for 1 mana. We just saw that. We got Giant Growth back. And if you really want to live the dream, you can, like, turn 3 double Giant Growth this and get through for, like, 10, or at least swing for 10. So, and get a couple of scries too. So, I don't know. This card looks really, really cool to me, and I do think it might have a chance in Standard in Boros aggro. I think this is maybe the best 2-drop for that deck outside of, say, a Danto Vanguard or something. But I definitely think it has more than just a chance. But we're getting into the really good stuff now, guys. Here's Mobilized District. It's just a land. It taps for a colorless mana, or you can pay 4, and Mobilized District becomes a 3/3 citizen creature token with vigilance until end of turn. Still a land, though. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature and planeswalker you control. Now, if you've seen the movie Us, this is really unsettling artwork. But aside from that, this is really good. I was hoping we'd get a creature land here in the next set or two. I kind of miss these. And this is really good, especially in control decks that are, say, just like 2 colors and actually have the space to run a colorless land or 2. This is just a Stalking Stones, and like John Finkel can tell you, or actually I think it was Randy Bueller. Excuse me. But there was like a draw go deck in 1998. It was Randy Bueller. That like the only creature in the deck, technically creature, was Stalking Stones. The entire deck was instant speed, except for that card, and it won most games that you played with that deck. And Stalking Stones is pretty bad by current standards, but this is just way better than Stalking Stones, even if you don't have, you know, a legendary or a planeswalker out. So I like this a lot. And if you have even 1 planeswalker or 1 legendary creature, a 3-mana activation to get yourself a 3/3 Vig is actually pretty good. Like, that's not bad at all. If you can get this down to just 1 or 2, it's obviously insane. But even activating this at 4 mana, I'm telling you guys, is not too bad in certain situations. This keeps you from having to play creatures in your control deck, you know? You can just play a ton of sweepers and not care, you know? You don't have to worry about a 5 or 6 mana win condition way up at the top of your curve, much less a sorcery speed one you actually have to spend mana on your turn for. This is just a effectively free to cast creature that is uncounterable. So it's really good too in the control mirror. So I like a lot. I like a lot about creature lands, pretty much always. And I think that this one actually has a real actual chance. But we're in the home stretch now. There's just a couple of cards left to talk about. First, we gotta talk about Tomik, Distinguished Advocate. This is 2 mana, 2 white mana, for a 2/3 human advisor with flying. And lands on the battlefield and land cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. Your opponents can't play land cards from graveyards. This guy is awesome. I like a lot about this dude, even if he doesn't have much relevance in Standard, but who cares about Standard? I care about Standard, obviously. You know, if they decide to print a bunch of like crazy land destruction, maybe Stone Rain is coming back, or maybe they'll actually reprint Sinkhole. Maybe they'll do it. It's not on the reserve list, you know, like they could do it. And just in case they do, we got this guy. You know, this is an anti-land control tech card, or land destruction, tech card. You know, no Ponza for you. Which I do like about it, but there's plenty of implications for it in older formats, where this hoses like Wasteland. That's pretty cool. But one of the best things about it is that it keeps your opponent from playing Life from the Loam. It just blanks Life from the Loam. So there's a lot of cool like sideboard techie reasons you might play this in like Legacy, Death, and Taxes, or perhaps even Modern. There are reasons you might play this card. You know, keeps people off of Ghost Quarter and stuff. There's just lots of little edge things this keeps your opponents from doing, but not you. You know, you can still do Crucible. You can still play your Wastelands and stuff. So there's a lot of cool stuff about this card. card, and I love that they printed it. I'm not sure how important it is in Standard, but I can have other interests. I almost forgot about MSiam Tank, everybody. Sorry about that. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 red for a 3/2 vehicle sighting with trample. And it's got crew 1, but you might not even have to worry about that, because whenever you cast a non-creature spell until end of turn, MSiam Tank gets +1/+1 and becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. I actually don't think this is super great. Sorry, you know. It's got a form of prowess, and it goes ahead and turns itself into a creature as soon as you cast a spell. And if you are able to cast 2 spells in a turn, you know, swinging for 5 power trample, not bad at all, you know. But if you were going to make a standard prowess deck, then I'm just not sure this is even going to make the cut at all, you know. There's just a lot better stuff you want to be doing in blue-red spells, and really blue-red spells is already a pretty tight deck list that I don't think has room for something like this. It's really just kind of mediocre in terms of power level, but in sealed, it ain't bad. You know, in draft, it's not bad. Much more of a limited card, I would say, and I do like that it's sort of resistant to sorcery speed removal and sweepers and stuff that might actually carry it into standard playability. But all things considered, I really doubt it. On most turns, you're not going to cast more than a spell or 2, at which point it's like a, what is it, the Cyclops, Piston Fist Cyclops, like a 4/3, you know, and that's just not actually that good to have a 3 mana 4/3. In most cases, you know, so I'm just not a huge fan of the card, and I don't really think that it's that playable. But again, in the limited environment, we could be talking. But here's my favorite card of the day by a million. Here's Massacre Girl. We finally get to see her. You know, she's mentioned in the flavor text on Thrill Kill Assassin from the first return to Ravnica. So we've been waiting forever, like what, almost 8 to 10 years, something like that, to see Massacre Girl. They actually gave her to us. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 black for a 4/4 legendary human assassin with menace. And when Massacre Girl enters the battlefield, each other creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Whenever a creature dies this turn, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So you see how this works? If it kills a 1 toughness creature, then it kills all the 2 toughness creatures, which in turn kills all the 3 toughness creatures. It just starts going on this like Beatrix Kiddo Harley Quinn rampage and kills everyone in the room, except for her. She stays standing. So in some ways, this could be a one-sided sweeper, and there's plenty of ways to facilitate that. You know, you don't think your opponent's going to be playing too many X1s? Just play them yourself. You know, just play 1 toughness creatures of your own. If you don't mind them dying, especially creatures like, say, Gutter Bones that can come back, that seems nice. Or maybe even like Burglar Rat, creatures that you get, like Dusk Legion Zealot, that you get value out of the turn they enter the battlefield anyway, and you don't care about them dying so much, you know. All you really have to do is kill a 1 toughness creature and maybe a 2 toughness creature, and then suddenly everything spirals out of control, and the board is clear, and she's just standing in a field of bodies. And that could be really, really, really good, especially considering if you're able to kill, you know, a fair amount of creatures with her. Then all of a sudden, you got a 4/4 menace that's really, really difficult to block on the battlefield. So I'm not totally, I know I'm freaking out a little bit about this card, and it seems like I just love it, and it's going to see all the standard play. If I had to be honest with you, I'm not sure this sees standard play because it's really, really conditional. It's tough to make work, and just on its face, a 5 mana 4/4 menace isn't the best deal. So I'm not totally sold on standard play. It seems like this is more of a sort of, you know, top-down, like a build-around card. And you have to be sort of playing against aggro for it to be really good. Like against control, I'm not a huge fan of this card, obviously. So it doesn't have all the spread of use. It's not insanely versatile, but against like tokens decks and aggro decks, this is pretty much going to kill just about everything on the board the turn that it comes down and leave you with a bigger creature than pretty much anything they've got in their deck. You know, this comes up against a Venerated Loxodon or something, it can just attack straight through it or trade with it. There's just a lot that I like about Massacre Girl. Massacre Girl. It's hard to say your name. For some reason, it's hard to go from cur to gur. For me, at least, you know, the way my mouth is arranged, I guess. But Massacre Girl, I can't do it. Massacre Girl, I'm going to hate having to say this card's name for the next year or 2 years or whatever. But Massacre Girl is absolutely insane, and if nothing else, you gotta love the flavor on this thing. But I think it actually does have a chance. And that is all of the cards from today, you guys. We actually got through that one relatively quickly, I think. But there's going to be more to talk about in the coming week. You know, we're officially halfway through this set. We've seen about 133 cards, and there's 264 cards in the set. So we might finish this thing off here in the next week or 2 weeks, I believe. My preview is scheduled, my exclusive preview, is scheduled for the 15th of this month. So we do still have a good little bit of time here in spoiler season to go. But we'll be here the whole time. Keep coming back to the channel and make sure you subscribe so that you get my exclusive preview on the 15th. Now, Wizards will probably take this weekend off from previewing cards. They usually do that for preview season, but that doesn't mean I'm going to take the weekend off. I'm thinking about maybe on Sunday putting out like my top 10 or 20 cards spoiled so far. So, again, make sure you're subbed for that content and just to make sure you get all the spoiler videos as they come out. Hit the bell for notifications. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this thing. Make sure to let me know how you feel about these cards down there in the comments section. In any case, I'm pretty sure that's it for now. You know, just do all the other YouTube stuff if you would, please, before you turn out the lights. Make sure you go over to TCG Player. They help keep the channel alive. They're good people. And they're also just truthfully the lowest place you're going to get both sealed products and pre-ordered singles from this set. You know, you can at least use them as a price guide if nothing else. If you don't have the Skrilla to order anything right now, you can at least see how much things are going to cost when the set does come out. But they also have boxes for well below what was MSRP before Wizards just came out and said there's no MSRP anymore. I guess they can do that. But it was a little confusing, but still, they have boxes for below $100 right now. So if you need any of that, hop over to the link in the description, go to TCG Player. Aside from that, there's also a link in the description to Patreon if you want to really help keep the channel alive. I really couldn't do this without Patreon, although I probably still would. I would just be very broke and barefoot. Actually, I'm barefoot right now, so that's not a good analogy. In any case, I'm pretty sure I'm done for now. So I'll see you guys a little bit later on this weekend with my top X cards that I like so far. And you tell me what cards you like so far down there in the section for that. But pretty sure I'm done. You guys have fun this weekend. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.